Hi there! Cool that you've decided to join in with me today, because today I'm going to show you the two main tools that you have in your mirrorless camera that will help you to set the exposure right. If you're new here, my name is Michael, I'm an enthusiastic hobby videographer, and my goal on this channel is to help you create great videos, to relive exciting moments and share with others in an efficient way. If that's something that you're interested in, I would love you to hit the subscribe button and become part of a community of hobby videographers. But now let's start with today's topic. The two main tools that you have in your mirrorless camera that will help you to expose your footage correctly. So the first one is metering. Every modern consumer camera has a built-in meter that measures the intensity of the reflected light from a subject, which will help the camera decide what is the correct exposure. And the result of the metering is what is usually indicated by the number that you have on your display, where it says plus minus, and if it's a 0.0, that will mean your exposure is correctly according to what the meter is measuring. If it's negative, it means your footage is underexposed. If it's positive, it means your footage is overexposed. Yet how the meter measures the light is dependent on the metering mode you have your camera on. Commonly, there are three different modes that you can choose from. The first one is the matrix metering, where the meter basically collects information from every single pixel in the image and decides on that what is a correct balanced exposure for the whole image. And depending on the brand, this might have a different term. For Sony, which I use, it is, for example, multi-segmented metering, or for Canon, it's evaluative metering, and for Nikon, it's matrix metering. And another common metering mode is center-weighted metering, where the meter basically just collects the data from the center of the frame and tries to expose this correctly. Let me demonstrate this in this scenario where you have an extreme difference between shadows and highlights. So now I have the camera set to automatic exposure and I have it to multi-segmented metering. But because I'm standing in the shadows and the highlights, so outside of the window, is quite bright, the camera can't expose for everything. So what it is trying to do now, it's exposing for the whole frame and trying to get the balance with everything in frame. And now I have it set to center-weighted metering. So basically the camera is trying to expose for everything which is in the center, which in this case now is me. So the highlights, all of the window back there, is way overexposed, but I should be properly exposed now. So if I move now to the side, you will see the camera is trying to adjust the exposure according to what's in the center now, which is this part. And the last common metering mode is spot metering, where you basically can choose which part of the image should be the determining factor of how the measurement is done. Most of the time you probably want to use the multi-segmented or matrix metering to ensure that the exposure is balanced across the whole frame. Yet the indicator from the meter, the number I mentioned before, just gives you a rough indication of how the exposure should be depending on your metering mode. But it doesn't give you a lot of detailed information. It can judge the situation wrongly in a difficult lighting situation. For example, if you're filming in the dark and you have a lot of very dark shadows, or if you're filming in the mountains where there is snow and you have a lot of whites, the sensors have trouble finding the correct exposure. And that is where your other tools comes into place, the histogram. The histogram basically shows you how your pixels are distributed along shadows to highlights, where everything on the left side represents your shadows, everything in the middle your midtones, and everything on the right your highlights. So ideally, if you're in a perfect lighting situation, you'll have a peak in the middle and then a little bit all the way on the left and a little bit all the way on the right. So you're using the full dynamic range of your camera. What you usually don't want to have is everything peaking on the left which would mean your footage is underexposed, or everything peaking on the right, which would mean your footage is overexposed. Yet, as mentioned before, in a tricky lighting situation, if there is snow, for example, you know a lot of the landscape is white, so you automatically gonna have a spike on the right side, so your metering might be saying you're actually overexposing your footage. And that is where you need to find the balance to make sure that also a significant amount of pixels will be in your midtones as well. And most likely in that scenario, you would have less pixels in your shadows. But your histogram really is your most important tool on a consumer mirrorless camera, because often it is very hard to judge whether your footage is exposed correctly when you're only looking at the small display. Yeah, and that's already it. These are your two main tools that will help you to get your exposure correct in your mirrorless camera. So I suggest you grab your camera right now, you check what kind of metering modes are available and how the image is reacting if you change that and point your camera to different subjects. And then also go into your settings menu, see where you can pull up that histogram, and then point your camera from window to an inside and see for yourself how your histogram is changing. I hope this was helpful and you got a better understanding of how these two tools can help you. And if you don't know how you can set your exposure, then I would highly suggest you check out my video from last week where I dove deeper into what elements are there for exposure and how they impact your footage. I don't want to make it longer now. I really thank you for watching. I hope you have a great time ahead and I hope to see you again next Thursday, and until then, stay safe and healthy. Bye bye.